What I'm going to talk about today is people analytics. Workforce analytics, it's pretty much the same thing, or I guess human capital management is another term that people use to basically describe the same phenomenon. And what people mean when they talk about people analytics is it's a kind of a new philosophical approach to management, if you will. So it's data-driven, evidence-based approach to managing people and organizations. And really the basic premise of people analytics is that we want to do away with managerial decisions that have to do with intuition or that are based on hunches or gut feeling. And ideally, we would want all managerial decisions to be based on hard, objective, rational data. Okay, that's the basic premise. That's what we want to get. So in other words, people analytics is the application of big data principles in the managing of people. So big data, of course, in and of itself is not an entirely new phenomenon, right? We've heard about big data in the last, I don't know, 10 to 15, maybe even more years, and has been used in different business areas such as operations, sales and marketing, right? CRM is all about the application of big data, or the use of a systematic cloud-scale collection of digital data about customers so as to find trends in the data, so as to know how to tailor specific services and products to different types of customers. And what's new about people analytics is that we apply the same principles, right? The systematic large-scale collection of different types of data that come from different sources about employees, about people and organizations. So as to make better, more informed, more rational decisions about how we want to utilize and make use of people and organizations. And at its core, people analytics relies on algorithm, or algorithmic decision making, if you will. Okay, so algorithms are these software tools that receive certain inputs from the environment, different types of digital data that goes into the algorithm, and then they apply certain rules to the data so as to spew out different types of outputs that would then be used by managers to make better strategic decisions that have to do with the management of people and organizations. So in essence, that's what people analytics is about. The reason it's important and relevant to talk about people analytics today is that there's been a lot of discussions and chatter about this newish, I guess, phenomenon. So you can see there's different examples here of the promise that people think people analytics brings into the field of management. It's going to transform the way we manage organizations. It's going to become much more scientific and rational. People talk about the different benefits of business analytics. They've written books about it. We have conferences about people analytics. So it really is an up-and-coming managerial phenomenon. To put this into numbers, you can see, I don't know if you can see it. I hope it's not super small. But there's been pretty significant growth in the field of people analytics. Its uptake. Is it way too small? Okay, so this says, let me read it out for you. The global workforce analytics industry is worth roughly 440, I can pretty much say anything, right? Yeah. $440 million today, or actually in 2015, and it's expected to grow to $1.3 billion by 2022. Other research shows that we're on the cusp of an exponential growth in the uptake and use of people analytics. So we've seen growth in this over the last couple of years, and also there's a growing awareness of businesses as to the promise of people analytics. And this one reads, in early 2015, only 24% of companies felt ready for people analytics, and this number has gone up to 32% just 1 year later. And people also talk about the head of people analytics as being the next C-level role in organizations. I want to give you a few examples of areas of application of people analytics in business. And this is by no means meant to be an exhaustive list, it's just a few primary examples. So human capital management, hiring and firing, right? So traditionally, like maybe to your point, sir, here, to what you said before, traditionally this has been a job that was done by human beings. But more so today, this is a job that's being taken by algorithms. With growing numbers of applications to different types of jobs, more HR managers are turning to algorithms to sift through applications. Just to give you one example here. So this is the way it's going to work. I have links throughout the presentation for different examples. 72% of resumes get rejected by applicant tracking systems, by algorithms, before a human being even sees them. Okay, so this is from a survey that was done a couple of years ago. So the vast majority of job applications never get seen by a human being today. And in hiring, algorithms beat instinct. Okay, so this is from HBR, from Harvard Business Review, based on a study that they did that found that when you use algorithms to hire people, I think they say that a simple equation in an algorithm outperforms human beings by at least 25%. And again, this is basically extolling the virtue of algorithms, what they can do that human beings cannot, right? They're unbiased, they're objective, they never get tired, they don't prefer certain types of people over other types of people, they never make mistakes, they'll learn from mistakes, and so on, right? So they're highly effective and efficient in sorting through thousands of applications. Hiring is just one example, but we use algorithms to fire people as well, or at least to identify people who we think are likely to quit. So we have algorithms in place that are used by multiple really big businesses that people have heard of. And they use algorithms to identify people who they believe are at risk of leaving. Right? So these would be based on different types of data points, things like job satisfaction, absenteeism, level of interactions with other employees, and the list can go on, and obviously it varies across different types of algorithms. But the point is that we would use these data points and run algorithmic calculations on them to determine who's at risk of leaving. And we as managers might decide to take preemptive action and maybe fire those people before they quit. Performance evaluation. So many of us go through what's called the APR, or different versions of an APR, which is the annual progress review or performance review, or whatever the case is. But increasingly so, we get evaluated all the time through a systematic, ongoing, large-scale collection of different types of digital traces that we leave as employees. And these algorithmic calculations would look at traditional KPIs, things like sales, did we hit our sales targets, feedback from customers, feedback from our colleagues, or whatever the case is. But increasingly so, also new, untraditional KPIs. So there's things here like time with my manager, time with strategic accounts, time in email. So it's basically slicing and dicing my activities as an employee in an extremely detailed manner, right? So as to identify different types of activities and interactions and tasks that I'm involved in on a daily basis. So essentially it gives managers a much more detailed and supposedly accurate description of what I do as an employee. Training. So in the past, training used to be off the shelf, right? For instance, businesses would hire consulting firms to deliver different types of training sessions for their employees. But this is going to change. It's already changing. And training are going to be specifically tailored to the demands of individual employees based on a much more detailed and, again, supposedly accurate evaluation of their performance. This is changing as well. So that's human resources. The planning of work is going to change. So even a seemingly simple task like shift scheduling is increasingly relying on the use of algorithms. Now there's a bunch of startups out there that work in this space. Staffjoy is just one of them. They've recently raised some money, and they basically collect data from individual employees, feed it into the algorithm, and the algorithm spits out the schedule for the next week or for the next month. That's scheduling. Forecasting is an important one as well in terms of work planning. We have different types of people analytics dashboards or software packages that do forecasting for organizations. So for instance, let's have a look at this. What we see here is what's called a sales funnel. Okay, so this is from a company called Accello, which are San Francisco based, but it was started by an Australian guy. And what we see on the right-hand side is the sales funnel, starting from 0 to 19% of making a sale, all the way down or up, depending on your perspective, to 100% actually making a sale. Now, behind this, there's an algorithm in place, which calculates the probability and the time that it might take from moving from one phase to the other to the next. in the sales process. And based on this, you can basically forecast how many consultants, so this is typically used by service firms, by consulting firms, how many consultants you'll need depending on the amount of sales it will be making within the next time period, however you choose to define it. Similarly, you can project the profitability of projects. You can forecast that. There it is. So again, this is from Axello. So based on how the project has gone so far, how much money you've spent, what kind of milestones you've hit so far, and in comparison to multiple other projects, the software can basically predict how profitable your project is going to be, obviously before it's actually happened. And resource optimization, right? That's another area where algorithms are heavily used. One primary example is Uber, but obviously there's thousands of other examples. And two of the main primary algorithms that Uber uses are their dispatch algorithm, which basically determines how rides are going to be associated with drivers. So it basically makes sure that they don't have too many drivers in one area and not enough drivers in other areas. So it kind of tries to evenly distribute drivers. And the pricing algorithm, right? So if you've used Uber before, you probably know that they have what's called surge pricing, which tries to maintain similar levels of supply and demand throughout time. So, and these things are crucial, right, for basically providing better service for their customers. And in fact, they say that the war between Uber and Lyft, which is the main competitor of Uber, is going to be determined through the use of algorithms. Productivity management is another important area where algorithms are used. So digital Taylorism is kind of the name that people use to describe this new phenomenon. Taylorism, scientific management, has anyone heard of that before? Right, so this is coming actually all the way back from 1911. Frederick Taylor, who was an engineer, and his ambition in life was to basically make management more scientific, or in other words, to introduce scientific principles into the management of organizations. And one of the things that he was famous for doing was what's called time and motion studies, where he basically timed people as they were doing different tasks and breaking down tasks into simpler chunks of tasks so as to make each of them more efficient. And now we have what's called digital Taylorism, which is basically Taylorism in speed that's fed by increasing amounts of data about what people do. So, does anyone know what's the picture on the left? Yeah, this is an Amazon warehouse. And what Amazon do, one of the things that they do is that they have the workers, the warehouse workers, wear GPS tags in the warehouse because they're so vast that employees can work up to 15 miles in one shift throughout the warehouse. 15 miles, right? But through the use of these GPS devices, Amazon tries to increase the efficiency of this process and kind of direct them through the warehouse in the most efficient way possible. So in terms of productivity management, the scope of productivity management is increasingly broadening. And this is because we have more data at our disposal as managers that we collect ongoingly on our employees. And the more data that we have, the more we can measure what they do in a more effective, and again, I'm going to do this, accurate way. And one of the things that we use to do that is what's called sociometric badges, which are similar to the badges that I showed you before. But these badges measure the amount of face-to-face interaction, conversational time that employees have with other people, physical proximity to other people, and physical activity levels, as well as vocal features, body motions, and relative location within the office. Okay, so again, it's a brave new world out there. And some companies also offer to do, or propose to do, different types of organizational network analyses, which are based on the amount of interaction that you have with other people in the office, who do you have the most amount of interactions with, what kind of backgrounds do they have, which departments they come from, what do you talk about, and you know, the list can go on and on. The amount of data and insights that you can generate about people goes on and on as well. So productivity management is another one. Now monitoring and surveillance. Okay, that's a pretty big feature of people analytics. So we're talking about online and offline surveillance, right? It can be anything from email, so tracking everything that you write in emails to customers, to other people, it doesn't really matter. It can be around the use of different types of badges like we saw. or SNA, which stands for social network analysis. Okay, but the idea is that it goes online and offline, so you never, outside of the scope or the gaze of people analytics. So very much like what David talked about before when he talked about social transparency. It's pretty much the same notion. Also in and out of the office. So it never stops. And someone mentioned this before during David's talk, that employers rather, increasingly use social media activity to learn about prospective employees, right? So this is definitely happening, social media activity. And it's comprehensive and increasingly granular. Biometric data, time activity, interactions that we have. Every minute activity that we have, that we do in the office, gets recorded as digital data. That then gets aggregated, analyzed, and fed to managers so as to make better, more effective, more rational, more objective, better informed decisions. That's kind of the party line, okay? So the promises of people analytics are to promote informed managerial decision-making that are data-based, rational, objective, there's no bias, there's no noise, no subjective impressions kind of dilute or pollute, rather, the process, and it's automatic in the sense that it's algorithmic. The idea is that we can create a more effective workforce in our business, because from the get-go, we only hire people that are suitable for the job that we're recruiting for, right? So, like we said before, we apply algorithms to hire people. And if that's the case, then people are probably going to be more satisfied at their jobs, going to do a better job, they're going to stay in their jobs for longer, so the retention rates are going to go up, and their productivity is going to go up as well. So everyone's going to benefit from this. And ultimately, we'll have an optimized structure in place and processes within the business. So we'll reduce time leakage within the organization, eliminate redundancies and inefficiencies, and if everything goes well, we'll be able to align people with culture, because we can design culture, and business strategy. Now, I want to talk about some of the issues that are problematic with people analytics, because as you probably guessed by now, I think this view is somewhat naive, okay, of algorithms as applied to people and what we can actually do with that. And the first problem that I see is what's called the reductionism trap. Has anyone heard of that before? Reductionism trap. So whenever, this comes from systems science or systems thinking. And the idea is that when we come across a complex phenomenon and we try to understand it, the most intuitive way that we as human beings tend to do that is by breaking this phenomenon apart into smaller, simpler chunks. And then we try to understand each individual chunk in separation from the other chunks. And then once we have an understanding of each individual part, we try to put them back together with all the understandings that we have of all the individual parts so as to generate, supposedly, an understanding of the entire entity. And this doesn't work, because typically what happens is that we lose sight of both the individual parts and the system as a whole. Right? So the reason that the car acts as a functioning system, is because everything combines together in a very specific way. And the meaning of the engine only derives from the engine being connected to a steering wheel, and a seat, and a body, and the list goes on and on, all the other parts of a car. Similarly, if you try to analyze the behavior of a sports team, or why a particular team is successful, you're not going to get very far if you're going to try to analyze the individual traits or properties of each individual player. In fact, the key to understanding the success or the failure of teams has to do with the culture of the team, the interactions among the different players, the kind of plays that they run, the cohesiveness among the players, not the individual traits of each individual player. Because again, what happens when you try to understand players in isolation from the context is that both the understanding of the player and the team as a whole doesn't make sense anymore. And the same thing applies, let me just finish the point, the same thing applies to understanding a super complex phenomenon, which is the way people act in organizations. It's immensely complex, and if you were to look at this as a combination of data points, it would probably be in the millions, if not billions. Right? So to think that we can kind of collect decontextualized individual data traces from different business areas so as to construct a comprehensive and understandable picture is incredibly naive. inevitably what we do when we use people analytics is that we try to build models of human behavior. And models inherently, by definition, are a simplified, partial representation of what actually happens in reality. And therefore, always, to some degree, are inaccurate. And when we apply inaccuracies at scale, which is what we're doing with algorithms, inevitably we increase the consequences of having errors, type 1 and type 2 errors. And this is what happens. It's inevitable. So that's another issue that we have to take into account. Another important point is that when we apply algorithms at scale in businesses, managers, to some degree, stop doing their job. They stop making decisions. They delegate their responsibility to making decisions to algorithms. And we all know that when we stop doing something, we get less good at it over time. Right? So it could be simple things like, with the increasing use of mobile devices, we stopped remembering phone numbers. Right? How many of us remember more than 5 phone numbers of our closest and best friends? Honestly, how many of us remember more than 5 phone numbers? Very few, very unique individuals. Most of us don't do that. And there's interesting studies that show that pilots, for instance, with the increasing use of autopilot, are forgetting how to fly. Okay, so this is a scientific fact that we have to consider. Ethical issues that have to do with the use of people analytics. Algorithms, as opposed to the canonical way of thinking about them, are not objective because they're made by human beings, right? They're developed and designed by human beings. And human beings have biases, inevitably, right? It's not a bad thing to be biased. In fact, to not be biased is to not be human. So algorithms, and I'm not going to get into the example, and by the way, if you want the slides, you can get in touch with me. I'm happy to send you the slides. Algorithms, because they're made by human beings, are not objective. This is just false, or a very naive way of looking at algorithms. Algorithms are opaque and oftentimes proprietary, right? So we use them, and whatever we use them for can have very significant impacts on large amounts of people, be prospective employees or citizens of a country, or whatever the case is. But as the people who get impacted by algorithms, for the most part, we wouldn't have access to the way the algorithm works, to the logic behind the decision, whose consequence we're facing. We just don't know what it is. We just have to face the fact that the decision has been made and just move on with our lives. Okay, there's zero transparency for the most part as to how that decision was made and how the algorithm was structured. You can't reason with algorithms, right? For the most part, humans are extraneous to the decision-making process, right? If an organization has decided to not hire you, you have no say in this. And it's not like you're arguing with a human being or trying to understand why a decision was made with a human being, because the logic is locked behind, proprietary code that you have no access to. So it's a completely different way of interacting with a decision-making entity or decision-making power that's inherently different from what we've been used to. And finally, predictive algorithms, which is kind of a subset of algorithmic management or people analytics, are a slippery slope. So I think someone mentioned, what was the name of the movie? Minority Report, right? So we punish before someone or something before a crime has even been committed. So for instance, if I wanted to make sure before that my talk started today, that I wanted to make sure that as many people as possible sitting here today would get the most amount of value out of my talk. And I were to determine that the best way to do that was to gauge or measure, if you will, in an accurate fashion, the learning potential of each individual sitting in this room today. Okay, and I decided that the best way to measure that was to ask people for their level of education. Right, so how many of you have a high school diploma and an undergrad degree, or a master's degree, or a PhD? And another data point would be, how many books have you read in the last year? 0, 1 to 5, 5 to 9, 10 to 14, and so on. And maybe I thought that your IQ score was important as well. Okay, 80 to 100, or 60 to 80, 80 to 100, 100 to, you get that. And based on the aggregation of these 3 or 4 data points, I were to construct a score for each individual person. And I could have decided that the people with the highest scores would be sitting in the front rows, and people with the lowest scores would be sitting in the back. I haven't done So the point is that, well, in fact, businesses do that, increasingly so, right? Because they do collect data about people and about their potential, and they might decide that people with higher potential are most, worth investing into. And they would be sent to better training programs, or they would be given better opportunities to interact with more lucrative clients, or whatever the case is. And in the end of the day, it's very likely that it would lead to self-fulfilling prophecies, right? That the people with the most potential would get the most opportunity, and therefore that they would actually perform in the best possible way. But think about the ethical implications of doing that. Because if I were talking to Gilles and said, look, man, sorry, but your score was not very high, can you please move to the back? You'd probably be thinking, what the hell, I haven't done anything. Right? It's a very tricky situation if you think about this. So let me just sum up. Conclusions, right? So people analytics holds great promise. So I'm not knocking it down altogether. I do think there's potential for this managerial approach to help managers improve and manage their businesses in a more efficient way. I do, however, believe they shouldn't replace human managers. Not yet anyway, not until we have a fully functioning AI device that can actually replace what people do. There's practical and ethical concerns that have to do with the application of people analytics. We need to keep in mind that not all that can be measured should be measured, because there's lots of data out there that's completely useless to people. But in the age of big data, more and more managers believe that the more data they have, the better. And in fact, many businesses face the problem of trying to sift through the data they have and actually decide what's useful and what's not useful. So not all that can be measured should be measured, and on the other hand, not all that should be measured can be measured. Okay, so think about this for a second. I think it's a pretty important point to keep in mind. And finally, and that's my shameless call for action here, there's zero scientific, empirical research on people analytics. So it's a pretty hyped up phenomenon, and more people talk about it and start using it, but to this day, as far as I'm aware, and I'm happy to hear otherwise if anyone has any information here, there's zero empirical academic research on the use of people analytics in business. And thanks very much for listening.